Nobody saw the Terran super Dreadnought coming. That was the point. The Ascendancy fleet had been in position above Callisto Station for 11 hours when it arrived, 230 warships arranged in the precise, formal geometry that the Korath Ascendancy used when it wanted to make a statement without yet making a move. The geometry said, "We are here. We are many. We have calculated every variable, and the calculation ends the same way regardless of what you do next." It was a language of pure power, spoken fluently by a civilization that had been speaking it for 400 years, without anyone answering back in kind. Callisto Station was humanity's largest deep space installation. 40,000 civilians, research divisions, transit hubs, 3 hospitals, a university campus that had been operating continuously for 60 years. The kind of place that takes generations to build and exists, in the final accounting, because enough people believed in the future enough to pour their lives into making it real. The Korath ambassador's message had been delivered 6 hours before the fleet arrived. It was polite in the specific way that ultimatums from overwhelming power are polite. The politeness of something that doesn't need to be impolite, that can afford courtesy because the outcome is already decided. The message said that Callisto Station occupied space that the Ascendancy required for an expansion corridor, that the inhabitants had 72 hours to begin evacuation, that the Ascendancy would provide transport for biological life only, no equipment, no data, no records, just bodies. The station itself and everything in it would be dismantled. The message ended with the kind of sentence that people who hold all the cards add at the end because they can. The Ascendancy hoped humanity would make the rational choice, and expressed confidence that a species capable of building something as impressive as Callisto Station possessed the wisdom to recognize the limits of its position. The response from Earth's government came 4 hours later. It was brief. It said that Callisto Station was not for negotiation, that its inhabitants were not moving, and that the Terran coalition expected the Ascendancy fleet to withdraw. The Ascendancy had read the response and run the numbers again. The numbers said the same thing they'd said the first time. The Terran coalition's military capacity was approximately 1/3 of what would be required to contest 230 Ascendancy warships in open engagement. Their nearest fleet assets were 14 hours away at maximum transit speed. The station itself had defensive systems capable of inflicting meaningful damage on any attacking force, but not capable of repelling one of this size for more than 3 or 4 hours. The numbers said humanity was bluffing. The numbers were wrong. They were wrong in the specific way that numbers about humanity tended to be wrong, which was that they accounted for what was visible and measurable, and failed to account for the variable that was neither. At hour 11 of the standoff, when the Ascendancy fleet was still in its formal geometry and Callisto Station was still there, and the 72-hour clock had 51 hours left on it, and every analyst in the Ascendancy's war, college was running the same calculation and arriving at the same conclusion, something appeared on the outer edge of the sensor envelope. One ship. It came out of transit at a range that the Ascendancy fleet's tactical systems immediately flagged as unusual, close enough to be inside the standard engagement envelope, far enough to have appeared without being tracked on approach. The transit signature was unlike any the Ascendancy database contained, which meant either a new drive technology or a modification to an existing one that produced a different energy profile, and both possibilities were filed simultaneously in the threat assessment queue while the identification systems ran their analysis. The analysis came back in 40 seconds. Terran Coalition Vessel, Classification, Super Dreadnought, Registry Designation TCS Eternity of Purpose, Length 4.7 kilometers, Displacement Classified, Armament Classified, Crew Classified. The Ascendancy Fleet Commander, Admiral Yaraket, looked at the identification data and then looked at the tactical display and then looked at the identification data again. One ship, 4.7 kilometers long, sitting at the edge of the engagement envelope with the same unhurried quality that very large things have when they are not concerned about the things around them. "Hail them," Yaraket said. The channel opened in 12 seconds. On the screen appeared a woman in a Terran Coalition uniform, seated in what appeared to be a command chair that was scaled to the rest of the vessel, large, functional, the aesthetic of something built to last rather than to impress. The woman was perhaps 60, dark-haired, gone silver at the temples, with the particular stillness of people who have made peace with difficult things. Her name, Yaraket's system, identified from the uniform insignia, was Fleet Admiral Mara Solis. She was the senior commander of the Terran Coalition's 1st Strategic Reserve. "Admiral Yaraket," Solis said, her voice was pleasant. "I'm glad the channel's open, saves time." Yaraket looked at the tactical data coming in on the Super Dreadnought. The Ascendancy sensors were very good. They were returning data on the TCS Eternity of Purpose that was, in several respects, making the tactical officers in the room go very quiet. "Admiral Solis," Yaraket said carefully, "you are one ship." "I am," Solis agreed. "Against 230. I counted them, yes." Yaraket studied the sensor data. The Eternity of Purpose was not powering weapons. Its shields were at standard transit levels, not combat levels. It was sitting in space with the quality of something that had arrived and intended to stay, and was not, in any observable way, preparing for a fight. "You understand," Yaraket said, "that your government's response to our ultimatum does not change the fundamental situation." "I understand that's how you've assessed it," Solis said. "I'd like to offer a different assessment. One ship does not change the mathematics." "That depends," Solis said, "on the ship." A pause. "We have been scanning your vessel since it arrived," Yaraket said. "The readings are," she paused, choosing a word, "unusual." "Yes, I imagine they are." Solis folded her hands on the arm of her command chair. "Admiral, I want to be direct with you, because I think direct is more useful than whatever the alternative is. The TCS Eternity of Purpose is the first vessel of her class. There are 7 more in various stages of completion at facilities your surveillance assets haven't found yet, which is by design. She represents 31 years of continuous development by the best engineering minds humanity has produced in that period, and she's not finished. We're still learning what she can do. I say that not to be mysterious, but because it's simply true." Yaraket looked at the sensor data. The readings on the Eternity of Purpose were, as she had said, unusual. The power output was at a level that her tactical systems flagged as inconsistent with the vessel's observed size, which meant either the sensors were wrong or the vessel's energy generation capacity was significantly beyond anything in the Ascendancy database. The weapon's signature was minimal at current power levels, but minimal at current levels implied something about higher levels that the tactical team was very carefully not saying out loud yet. "You came alone," Yaraket said. "Yes." "Why?" Solis looked at her steadily. "Because what I have to show you only needs to be shown once, and because I wanted to give you the conversation before the demonstration. So that there's no confusion about sequence. We talked first, and then you saw what you saw, and that was the order we chose." Yaraket processed this. "You intend to demonstrate something." "Only if the conversation doesn't resolve things," Solis said. "I'm genuinely hoping the conversation resolves things. Demonstration is." She paused briefly. "Demonstration is a poor second choice. It means someone made a decision I'd rather they hadn't." The bridge of the Ascendancy flagship was quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when people are thinking very carefully about what they're hearing. "Admiral Solis," Yaraket said, "Callisto Station is in Ascendancy expansion space. This is not a negotiating position. It is a geographic and political fact that predates this conversation by 6 years of territorial mapping. Your coalition's presence in this region was always going to come to this point." "We know you believe that," Solis said. "We understood." Watching the territorial mapping over those 6 years, where it was heading, That's actually why the eternity of purpose is here today and not still in a construction bay. We've had 6 years to think about this conversation. And your conclusion from 6 years of thinking, Yaraket said slowly, was to send one ship. My conclusion, Solis said, was that 230 ships sent a message that required one ship to answer. Sending 230 ships of our own would have answered a different message. One about fleets and numbers and the mathematics of force that you've clearly already run. I'm not interested in that conversation. I'm interested in a different one. Which is? Solis was quiet for a moment. The one where I show you what the eternity of purpose can do, she said, and you decide what that means for the mathematics. Yaraket looked at her tactical team. The officer running the weapons analysis gave a small, precise shake of her head that meant, we don't have a complete picture yet, and I'm not comfortable with that. An incomplete picture of a 4.7-kilometer Terran vessel was not, in itself, a reason to stand down from an ultimatum backed by 230 warships, but it was a reason to keep talking. What do you propose to demonstrate? Yaraket asked. There's an asteroid, Solis said, at coordinates I'm transmitting now. It's been cleared, no life, no infrastructure, nothing of value to anyone. It's approximately the mass of a small moon, 600 kilometers across. Yaraket checked the coordinates. The asteroid existed, confirmed by her navigation systems. It was sitting in the outer reach of the system, exactly as described. Yes, Yaraket said carefully. I'd like to fire one shot at it, Solis said. One, then I'd like to continue this conversation. The bridge was very quiet. One shot, Yaraket said. One. Yaraket looked at her tactical officer. The tactical officer's expression was the specific expression of a professional who is encountering data that doesn't fit her existing frameworks and is handling it by being extremely still. You may proceed, Yaraket said. What happened next took 4.3 seconds. The TCS Eternity of Purpose, which had been sitting in space with the calm of something that had nowhere else to be, brought one weapons system online. Just one. The power reading that the ascendancy sensors registered when that single system activated caused 2 separate tactical consoles on the flagship to throw alert flags, not because anything was targeting the fleet, but because the energy signature was large enough that the threat assessment algorithms had been built to flag it as a matter of reflex. The shot itself was a single coherent energy discharge. It traveled across the distance between the eternity of purpose and the asteroid at the speed that coherent energy travels, which is the speed of light, which meant it arrived almost instantaneously, which meant what the Ascendancy Fleet's sensors saw was weapon active, weapon fired, target location changed. The asteroid, 600 kilometers across, the mass of a small moon, a geological object that had been in that orbit for longer than humanity had been a species, was no longer in its orbit. It was in approximately 4,000 pieces, distributed across a volume of space that was considerably larger than the volume the asteroid had previously occupied, moving outward in all directions at velocities that the navigation systems immediately flagged as a debris field hazard for the next several decades. The fleet's sensors ran the energy calculation on what had just happened. The tactical officer looked at her numbers. She looked at them again. She pulled up a secondary system and ran them a third time. Then she turned to Admiral Yaraket and said, in a voice from which she had removed everything except the information, Admiral, the energy output of that discharge exceeds our most powerful capital ship weapon by a factor of, she paused, looked at the number, by a factor of 47. The bridge of the Ascendancy flagship was silent. On the comm screen, Fleet Admiral Mara Solis was sitting in her command chair with her hands folded, looking at Yaraket with the patient expression of someone who has said what she came to say and is waiting for the response. One shot, Solis said, from one weapon system. The Eternity of Purpose has 19 primary weapon systems and 46 secondary systems. I want to be transparent about that. I don't want there to be any ambiguity about what you've observed. Yaraket looked at the debris field that had been an asteroid. She looked at the tactical data. She looked at Mara Solis. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. It came out quieter than she'd intended. "Because I want you to make an informed decision," Solis said. "Not a decision based on incomplete information, not a decision based on bluff or posture, or the mathematics of what was true 6 months ago. An informed decision, made by an intelligent person with full knowledge of what the situation actually is." Yaraket was a career officer. She had spent 40 years in the Ascendancy Fleet, rising through competence and judgment, and the ability to read situations clearly without the distortion of ego. Those 40 years had taught her many things, and one of the most important was the difference between a position that could be held and a position that could not. "If I withdraw the fleet," she said slowly, "and return to Ascendancy space, the High Command will want an explanation," Solis said. "Yes, I've thought about that." She reached to one side and picked up a data package. "I've prepared a full technical summary of the Eternity of Purpose's capabilities in sufficient detail to be credible to your High Command's technical evaluation teams. Not everything, I'm not going to hand you our full specifications, but enough to make the case clearly. You can tell them that the mathematics changed, because it did." Yaraket stared at her. "You prepared a briefing package," she said, "for my High Command." "I prepared several things," Solis said. "I had 6 years, and I wanted this conversation to be useful for both of us." There was a long silence on the channel. "You could have led with the demonstration," Yaraket said finally. "You could have fired first and talked second. That's the conventional approach in a situation like this." "Yes," Solis said, "but then you'd be responding to a threat, and people responding to threats make different decisions than people responding to information. I wanted you to have the conversation before the demonstration, so that the demonstration was context rather than provocation, so that you could make a decision rather than a reaction." She paused. "The Ascendancy is a 400-year civilization. You've made mostly good decisions for 400 years. I'm asking you to make one more." Yaraket looked at the debris field. She looked at the sensor data on the TCS Eternity of Purpose, sitting alone in space at the edge of the engagement envelope, 19 primary weapon systems and 46 secondary systems, one of which had just removed a small moon from the universe. She looked at Callisto Station on the long-range display, 40,000 people, 60 years of continuous human habitation, 3 hospitals, a university. She thought about the 400 years of decisions that had built the Ascendancy into what it was, and the one decision that could subtract something significant from what it would become, and the one ship sitting in space that made the subtraction possible, and the admiral on the screen who had flown it here alone, and prepared a briefing package for her High Command, and asked for a conversation before a demonstration. "I need to contact my High Command," Yaraket said. "Of course," Solis said, "I'll be here." The channel closed. Yaraket turned to her bridge. "Get me a secure line to High Command," she said, "and someone calculate the minimum safe transit distance from that debris field. We may be repositioning shortly." The secure line to Ascendancy High Command took 22 minutes to establish, accounting for encryption protocols, and the fact that she was requesting a connection to the full council rather than a duty officer, which required assembling people who did not assemble quickly at this time of station cycle. When the council appeared on her screen, 9 faces, representing the full Ascendancy military and political leadership, looking at her with the expressions of people who have been interrupted by something they expect to be manageable, she delivered her report. She delivered it as she delivered everything, precisely, without embellishment, in the order that made the information clearest. She started with the TCS Eternity of Purpose's arrival. She described its specifications as measured by her sensors. She described the conversation with Admiral Solis. She described the demonstration, and then she displayed the sensor data and the energy calculation, and she let the council look at the number, the factor of 47, in silence for a moment before continuing. She said that Admiral Solis had transmitted a technical briefing package, and she was forwarding it now. She said that Admiral Solis had indicated the existence of 7 additional vessels of the same class in various stages of completion. She said that the Eternity of Purpose had 19 primary weapon systems and 46 secondary systems, and had used one of the secondary systems for the demonstration. She recommended withdrawal. The council was quiet for a longer time than councils usually were. Then the senior civilian member, a man named Architect Fenn, who had been in his position for 20 years and had never in those 20 years recommended retreat from any territorial position, said, "One shot." "One shot," Yaraket confirmed, "from one secondary weapon system." Another silence. "The briefing package," Fenn said. "You believe it is credible?" "My technical team is reviewing it now," Yaraket said. "Preliminary assessment is that it is internally consistent and that the specifications it describes are consistent with what our sensors measured." She paused. "I believe Admiral Solis prepared it specifically to be credible to our evaluation teams, because she anticipated this conversation and wanted it to be useful to us." Fenn looked at her with the expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "She anticipated this conversation," he said. "She said they had 6 years to prepare," Yaraket said. "My assessment is that she used them well." The council deliberated for 40 minutes. Yaraket waited, monitoring the tactical situation, watching the TCS Eternity of Purpose sit in space with the same unhurried quality it had displayed since arriving. She watched Callisto Station on the long-range display. She watched the debris field slowly expanding from where the asteroid had been. When the council came back, Fenn spoke for them. "Admiral Yaraket," he said, "you are authorized to withdraw the fleet to Ascendancy space pending a full strategic review." He paused. "And please convey to Admiral Solis that the Ascendancy requests formal diplomatic communication at the earliest convenience." "Yes, Architect Fenn." "One more thing," he paused. Tell her that was well done, the conversation first. That was," he seemed to search for a word. "That was well done." The channel closed. Yaraket opened the line to Admiral Solis. Solis was exactly where she'd been command chair, hands folded, patient. "We are withdrawing," Yaraket said, "and the High Command requests formal diplomatic communication." "I'll make sure the relevant teams are available," Solis said. "And Admiral, thank you for hearing me." Yaraket looked at her for a moment. "You came alone," she said. "One ship against 230. That required a specific kind of confidence." "Or a specific kind of necessity," Solis said. "Is there a difference?" Solis considered this briefly. "Probably not," she said. "In practice." The line closed. Yaraket turned to her fleet commander. "Begin withdrawal. Standard formation. No rush." She looked at the tactical display one more time. "And someone get me a record of the debris field dispersal pattern. I want our navigation database updated before we transit." What happened at Callisto Station over the following 14 hours was quiet by the standards of what had preceded it. The Ascendancy fleet withdrew in the precise, formal geometry of a force that was choosing to leave rather than being forced to, which was a distinction that mattered to them, and that Solis had understood would matter when she'd made the conversation come before the demonstration. 230 ships, arranged in their statement of power, departing without the power having been fully tested, which was, she had always believed, the better outcome. Force used proves something. Force unused but clearly present and clearly understood proves something different, something that lasts longer. The TCS Eternity of Purpose remained at Callisto Station for 3 days after the withdrawal, partly for diplomatic purposes. The first round of formal Ascendancy communications came through within hours and required Solis's presence, which she provided through her communications team, while managing the logistical side of standing down from a situation that had been 11 hours from potentially becoming something else entirely. Partly to allow the Ascendancy's technical teams, who were clearly running their analysis of the sensor data and the briefing package at considerable pace, to reach whatever conclusions they were going to reach without the added variable of the eternity of purpose being in transit, and therefore not directly observable. And partly because the people on Callisto Station had asked her to stay for a few days, and she had said yes. The request had come from the station director, a man named Dr. Aaron Webb, who had been running Callisto Station for 12 years, and who had spent the 11 hours of the standoff doing exactly what you did when you ran a station with 40,000 people and an overwhelming enemy fleet in your sky, keeping things as normal as possible for as long as possible, making plans he hoped he wouldn't need, and not telling people how bad the math looked because they already knew, and it didn't help anyone to say it out loud. He met Solis when she came aboard the station on the second day. He was tall and slightly rumpled in the way of people who have been awake for too long and have made peace with it, with a handshake that was firmer than his general appearance suggested and eyes that had the particular quality of people who have just experienced something they know they'll be thinking about for the rest of their lives. "Admiral Solis," he said. "Dr. Webb," she said, "how's the station?" He looked at her. "How's the station?" he repeated. "It's a genuine question," she said. 11 hours is a long time for 40,000 people to be under that kind of pressure. I want to know how the station is." Webb thought about the 11 hours, about the calls from parents asking where the evacuation ships were, which he'd had to explain weren't coming because the Ascendancy's offer only covered biological transfer, and he'd made the decision in the first hour that the station was not evacuating because the station was not surrendering, and that decision had been his to make, and he'd made it and lived in it for 11 hours without knowing if it was the right one. About the researchers who had kept working in the labs, the doctors who had kept seeing patients, the teachers who had somehow kept classes running for the first 6 hours before the parents pulled their children home. About the university rector who had sent him a message at hour 8 saying, "We are not leaving our library." About the maintenance crew who had spent the entire 11 hours running drills on the emergency atmosphere systems, not because they had a specific threat to respond to, but because it was something useful to do, and something useful to do was the most important thing in the world at that moment. "The station," Webb said, "is intact and exhausted," and he paused. "A student asked me this morning what you said to them, the Ascendancy, that made them leave." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know yet. I told her I hoped someone would explain it." He looked at Solis. "Will you come talk to us? The whole station, if you're willing. They want to hear it from you." Solis thought about the briefing she had in 40 minutes, and the diplomatic communication coming through at 2 hours, and the fleet logistics review she'd pushed to tomorrow, but couldn't push further. "Yes," she said, "tonight if that works." It worked. She stood in the station's main assembly space that evening, a large hall that had been built for concerts and graduations, and the kind of events that mark the passage of time in a place where people choose to make their lives. And she looked at 40,000 people's worth of representatives, the ones who had been able to come, filling every seat and the standing spaces around them, and she said what was true. She said that the TCS eternity of purpose had been 31 years in the making, not because it took 31 years to build a ship, but because it took 31 years to understand what kind of ship humanity actually needed. She said that the Ascendancy had been watching human space for 6 years and humanity had been watching back, and what humanity had seen was exactly what it had expected to see. Because civilizations that expand through ultimatum have a pattern, and the pattern was readable, and they had read it. She said that she had gone to that conversation wanting it to work, because demonstration was always the second choice, and she had been very glad it was enough. She said that the people who had built the eternity of purpose, 31 years of engineers and physicists, and the kinds of minds that work on things they'll never see finished, had done it because they believed, without being able to prove it, that there would come a day when it mattered. She said that today had been that day. A student in the third row, maybe 19, maybe 20, the age when things happen to you that you carry for the rest of your life, raised her hand. "Admiral Solis," she said, and her voice was very steady for someone whose hands Solis could see were shaking slightly. "Were you afraid?" The assembly hall was completely quiet. Solis looked at the student for a moment. "Yes," she said, "the whole time." The student seemed to need to hear that. Something shifted in her face, not relief exactly, recognition. "Then why did you come alone?" Solis thought about the question. She'd been in situations before where she could have given an answer that was true and also somewhat larger than the real truth, the kind of answer that serves the moment at a slight cost to accuracy. She'd always found that kind of answer less useful than it appeared. "Because the message I needed to send required one ship," she said. 230 ships sending an ultimatum required one ship in response. If I'd come with a fleet, it would have been about fleets. I needed it to be about something else." "About what?" Solis looked at her. "About the fact that one of ours is enough," she said simply. "Not because of the weapons, because of the 31 years, because of everyone who worked on it not knowing for certain there would ever be a day it was needed and worked on it anyway. That's what I needed the ascendancy to understand, not the firepower. The 31 years." The student sat back in her chair and looked at Solis with the expression of someone fitting a piece into a place they hadn't known was empty. In the ascendancy, the analysis of the Callisto Station incident took 11 weeks. The technical teams completed their review of the sensor data and the briefing package. The Strategic Review Board completed its assessment. The full High Council convened 3 times, and the proceedings of all 3 sessions were, by unanimous vote, classified at the highest available level, which meant that what was said in them stayed within those rooms. What was not classified because it couldn't be, because too many people had observed it, was the fact of what had happened. 230 Ascendancy warships, carrying an ultimatum to a human installation, had withdrawn, not because of a countervailing fleet, not because of political pressure or economic consequences or the intervention of neutral parties, because of one ship and one shot and one admiral who had asked for the conversation before the demonstration. In the 47 star systems that monitored ascendancy movements as a matter of standard intelligence practice, the withdrawal was noted. In the diplomatic corps of 23 different civilizations, assessments of the human coalition were quietly updated. In the war colleges and strategic planning departments of species that humanity had never met and would not meet for another 100 years, the incident was filed under a category that different civilizations labeled differently, but that meant, in all of them, essentially the same thing. Do not assume you have the complete picture. In the university on Callisto Station, the student who had asked Admiral Solis whether she'd been afraid graduated 4 years later with a degree in aerospace engineering and accepted a position at a facility whose full nature and purpose were not in any public record. She was working on the 9th vessel of the Eternity of Purpose class. She worked on it knowing that she might not see the day it mattered. She worked on it anyway. That was, she had come to understand, the whole point. Dr. Webb sent Admiral Solis a message on the 3rd anniversary of the incident. It was short. He was that kind of person. It said, "The student who asked if you were afraid is working on hull plating for the resolution. I thought you'd want to know." Solis read the message in the small hours of the morning when she was in her office on the Eternity of Purpose, 3 systems from Callisto Station, between one thing and whatever came next. She sat with it for a moment. Then she sent back, "Good, tell her we're counting on her." The galaxy had not in the end realized too late. The galaxy had realized at exactly the right time, which was the moment Solis had chosen and prepared for and flown alone to deliver. One shot into an asteroid that was no longer there. 31 years of human patience and determination and quiet, unverifiable belief that the day would come made visible in 4.3 seconds. The asteroid was gone. The station was whole. The message had been received. And 8 more ships were being built by people who understood, because they had been told by someone who had been there, that the work they were doing in the years before the day mattered as much as anything that happened on the day itself. Maybe more.